Hello. Welcome to tonight's bedtime story by Lucid Tales. I hope your day has held you gently in the palm of its hand. But whether it has been gentle ripples or crushing turbulence for you, it's time to relax now. Find somewhere comfortable, maybe your bed or a favourite armchair, and make sure you're ready for sleep. Take your shoes off if you can, and feel the freedom in your toes, the little loosening that means it's time for bed. Tonight's story is Katie Crackernuts, a traditional Scottish fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen, as in many lands have been before and may never be again. The king had a daughter called Anne, and the queen had one named Kate, but Anne was far bonnier and more beautiful than the queen's daughter, with long black hair and the rosiest blush to her fair cheeks. They loved one another as sisters, and spent much of their time together, talking and wandering through the beautiful gardens. But the queen was jealous of the king's daughter being bonnier than her own, and cast about to spoil her beauty so that her own daughter might have her pick of a husband. In time she found a henwife who was willing, who said to send Anne to her fasting and hungry so that she might be changed. So early one morning the queen woke Anne, and before she could eat even a bite of breakfast said to her, "Go, my dear, to the henwife in the glen, and ask her for some eggs." So Anne set out. But as she passed through the kitchen she saw a crust of bread lying on the table, and she took and munched it as she went along. When Anne came to the henwife's she asked for eggs, as she had been told to do. The henwife said to her, "Lift the lid off that pot there, and see what is inside." The lassie did so, but nothing happened. The henwife sneered. "Go home to your Minnie and tell her to keep her larder door better locked." So Anne went home to the queen and told her what the henwife had said, and the queen knew from this that the lassie had had something to eat that morning. So she watched fiercely the next, and sent Anne away fasting and hungry. But the princess saw some country folk picking peas by the roadside, and being very kind she spoke to them, and was given a handful of the peas, which she ate on the way. When she came to the henwife said, "Lift the lid off that pot, and see what's inside." So Anne lifted the lid, but nothing happened. Then the henwife was rare angry, and said to Anne, "Tell your Minnie the pot won't boil if the fire's away." So Anne went home and told the queen. On the third morning the queen went along with the girl herself to the henwife. Now this time, when Anne lifted the lid off the pot, her own pretty head fell right off into it, and out sprang a sheep's head where her own had been. So the queen was satisfied, and took her back home. But Kate, the queen's daughter, was far and away mourning the tragedy that had befallen her dear heart sister, and so she took a fine linen cloth and wrapped it around her sister's head, and took her by the hand, and they both went out to seek their fortune. They went on, and they went on, and they went on, until they came to a fine castle, with fluting turrets and arching buttresses that looked almost like it had grown from the kernel of a dream. Kate knocked at the door, and asked for a night's lodging for herself and a sick sister. They went in, and found it was a king's castle, who had 2 sons, and one of them was sickening away to death, and no one could find out what ailed him. The only clue was a worn-out pair of dancing shoes by his bed every morning. The king had offered a peck of silver to any who could sit up with his son one night and discover the cause, but everyone who had sat up with him over just one night had disappeared and was never heard from again. But Kate, who was a very brave and canny girl, offered to sit up with him herself. Till midnight all went well. The prince slept deep as the dead, and looked to be sleeping himself well. But as 12 o'clock chimed, the sick prince rose, dressed himself, and slipped downstairs. Kate followed close behind, but the prince never noticed her. The prince went to the stable, saddled his horse, called his hound, and jumped up into the saddle, and Kate leapt lightly up behind him. Away rode the prince and Kate through the wide, deep greenwood, and Kate, as they passed, plucked nuts from the trees and filled her apron with them. They rode on, and on, and on, until they came to a pretty green hill, round and perfect in shape. The prince reined in his horse and spoke. "Open, open, green hill, and let the young prince in with his horse and his hound." And Kate added, "and his lady behind him." Immediately the green hill cracked open like a great door was set there, and they passed in. They entered a magnificent hall, brightly lit, and many beautiful fairies surrounded the prince and led him off to dance. Meanwhile, Kate, unnoticed, hid herself behind the door. There she saw the prince dancing and dancing and dancing, till he could dance no longer and fell upon a couch exhausted. Then the fairies would fan him till he could rise again and go on dancing. At last the cock crowed, and the prince made all haste to get on horseback. Kate jumped up behind, and home they rode, back through the wide, deep greenwood. When the morning sun rose, they came in and found Kate sitting down by the fire and cracking her nuts. Kate said the prince had had a good night, but she would not sit up another, unless she was to get a peck of gold. The second night passed as the first had done. The prince got up at midnight and rode away to the pretty green hill and the fairy ball, and Kate rode with him, gathering nuts as they rode through the wide, deep greenwood. This time she did not watch the prince, for she knew he would dance and dance and dance, and so cast her eyes around to see what wonders she might see. Close by she saw a fairy baby playing with a wand, and overheard one of the fairies say, "3 strokes of that wand would make that Kate's sister as bonny as ever she was." So Kate rolled nuts to the fairy baby, and rolled nuts across that clever stone floor until the baby toddled after them and let fall the wand, and Kate took it up and put it in her apron. And at cockcrow, Kate and the prince rode home as before, and as fast as ever, and the very moment Kate got home to her room she rushed and touched Anne 3 times with the wand. Wonder and delight, Anne's hideous sheep's head fell off and out sprouted her own pretty face again, with her rosy cheeks and long black hair. Once again the king asked Kate to sit up with his son, and this time Kate only consented to watch if she should marry the sick prince, should she make him well. All went on as on the first 2 nights, and Kate and the prince rode to that pretty green hill and under the earth once more. This time the fairy baby was playing with a birdie. Kate heard one of the fairies say, "3 bites of that birdie would break the sick prince's enchantment, and the sickness from fairy music, and make him as well as ever he was." And so Kate once again rolled the nuts she had to the fairy baby, till the birdie was dropped, and Kate put it in her apron. At cockcrow they set off again, but when they returned to the castle, this time instead of cracking her nuts as she used to do, Kate plucked the feathers off the birdie and cooked it. The prince, turning in his bed at the savoury scent of the roast, said, "Oh, I wish I had a bite of that birdie." So Kate gave him a bite of the birdie, and he rose up on his elbow. By and by he cried out again, "Oh, if I had another bite of that birdie." So Kate gave him another bite, and he sat up on his bed. Then he said again, "Oh, if I had but a 3rd bite of that birdie." So Kate gave him a 3rd bite, and he rose hale and strong, dressed himself and sat down by the fire, and when the folk came in the next morning, they found Kate and the young prince cracking nuts together, and being very merry. Meanwhile the sick prince's well brother had seen Anne, and had fallen in love with her, as everybody did who saw her sweet, pretty face with its rosy cheeks and long black hair. So the sick son married the well sister, and the well son married the sick sister, and they all lived happily and died happily, and never again did any of them visit the fairy ball under that pretty green hill. Good night. Sleep well, and I will see you soon for another bedtime story.